A tempestuous wind, heavy with the cloying perfume of magnolias and the raw, earthy scent of tobacco, swept across the sprawling acres of Belle Reve, the Devereaux plantation. It was a wind that whispered of change, a harbinger of the storm that was to break upon the seemingly tranquil world of Nashville, Tennessee, in the year 1844. The plantation, its name a cruel paradox for the souls who toiled under its beautiful and brutal skies, was a kingdom ruled by the formidable Eleanor Devereaux, a woman whose heart, since the passing of her husband, seemed to have been forged from the same iron that branded her human property. Her twin daughters, Clara and Delphine, were the plantation's most prized blossoms, their futures as meticulously cultivated as the finest tobacco leaves. Clara, the elder by a whisper of time, was a creature of fire and spirit, her auburn hair a crown of defiance, her laughter a rare, rebellious melody in the somber symphony of Belle Reve. Delphine, her opposite in every conceivable way, was a vision of ethereal grace, her hair the color of moonlight, her temperament as gentle as a summer breeze. She was the serene river to Clara's tempestuous sea. Despite their contrasting natures, the twins were two halves of a single soul, their bond unbreakable, forged in the lonely crucible of a childhood overshadowed by a distant father and a domineering mother. Eleanor Devereaux was a woman of rigid principles, her world a stark, unyielding landscape of black and white, master and slave. Her daughters were her most valuable assets, their impending marriages to the sons of other wealthy planters, strategic alliances designed to fortify the Devereaux dynasty. But the seeds of a forbidden love, carried on the winds of change, had already taken root in the fertile ground of Belle Reve's secrets. Two men, their lives bound to the plantation by the cruel chains of servitude, had captured the hearts of the Devereaux twins, igniting a passion that would threaten to consume their world in a conflagration of defiance and desire. Elias, the blacksmith, a man whose strength was etched in the powerful lines of his body and the quiet dignity of his gaze, had long been the object of Clara's secret, burning admiration. His hands, capable of both taming fire and shaping iron, possessed a power that both thrilled and terrified her. Delphine, in the quiet solitude of her own heart, had been captivated by Samuel, a man whose soulful voice, rising from the slave quarters in the twilight hours, was a hauntingly beautiful melody of sorrow and hope. The year 1844 was to be the year that these stolen glances and whispered secrets would blossom into a dangerous, all-consuming love, a love that dared to defy the sacrosanct laws of both God and man. It was a year that would test the unbreakable bond of sisterhood, challenge the unyielding authority of a formidable matriarch, and set in motion a chain of events that would forever alter the destiny of Belle Reve. This is the story of Clara and Delphine Devereaux, the Tennessee twins, and the forbidden union that would send shockwaves through the heart of Nashville society. A tale of love, rebellion, and the indomitable spirit of the human heart in its quest for freedom. The whispers of their story would become a roar, a testament to a love that refused to be silenced, a love that dared to dream in a world determined to keep it in chains. The humid Tennessee air, thick with the scent of honeysuckle and unspoken desires, was about to be set ablaze. The oppressive heat of the Tennessee summer clung to Belle Reve like a shroud, the air a thick, suffocating blanket of magnolia and raw tobacco. It was a world of stark, brutal contrasts, of opulent beauty and abject misery. A world where the lines between right and wrong were as sharply defined as the endless rows of tobacco that stretched to the horizon. Clara, her auburn hair a fiery crown under the midday sun, stood on the veranda of the great house, her gaze fixed on the distant figures toiling in the fields. A restless energy hummed within her, a yearning for something more than the gilded cage of her existence. Her life, like that of her twin sister, was a meticulously orchestrated performance, a series of curated social engagements and tedious lessons in etiquette, all designed to mold them into perfect Southern belles, ready to be bartered for land and fortune. "You'll burn to a crisp standing in this heat," Delphine's gentle voice broke through Clara's reverie. She emerged from the cool darkness of the house, a parasol held aloft to shield her delicate porcelain skin from the sun's harsh, unforgiving rays. Clara turned, a wry smile playing on her lips. Better to burn than to be bored to death within those walls. Delphine sighed, her blue eyes, the color of a summer sky, filled with a familiar, gentle concern. "Mother will have your hide if you ruin your complexion before the Vanderbilts' ball." "Let her," Clara retorted, her voice laced with a defiance that was as much a part of her as the color of her hair. "I'd rather have a face full of freckles than a head full of vapid conversation about cotton prices and the latest Parisian fashions." Delphine said nothing, her silence a testament to her more cautious, contemplative nature. She understood her sister's frustrations, for she too felt the suffocating constraints of their gilded cage. But unlike Clara, she had learned to find solace in the small, stolen moments of beauty that Belle Rêve offered. The gentle cooing of the morning doves, the vibrant hues of a sunset, the haunting melodies that often drifted from the slave quarters in the evenings. It was one of those melodies that had first captured her heart, a soulful baritone that seemed to speak of a sorrow too deep for words. The voice belonged to Samuel, a man whose quiet strength and gentle eyes had stirred something within her that she had never known existed. She had found herself drawn to the ancient willow tree by the river, a place where he often sought refuge, his music a balm to the weary souls of the enslaved. Their encounters were brief, stolen moments of shared glances and whispered words, a dangerous, exhilarating dance on the edge of a precipice. They spoke of music, of dreams, of a world beyond the confines of Belle Rêve, a world where the color of one's skin did not determine one's worth. Clara, too, had a secret of her own, one that she guarded with a ferocity that matched her fiery spirit. Her heart belonged to Elias, the blacksmith, a man whose hands, calloused and strong, could create works of both immense power and delicate beauty. She would often find excuses to visit the forge, her heart pounding in her chest at the sight of him, his body glistening with sweat as he hammered a glowing piece of iron into submission. He would look up, his dark eyes meeting hers, and in that fleeting moment, a silent, electrifying conversation would pass between them, a shared understanding of a love that could never be. He spoke little, his words as carefully chosen as the blows of his hammer, but his eyes, they spoke of a longing that mirrored her own. That evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, the twins found themselves drawn to the willow tree, their shared secret hanging in the air between them like an unspoken promise. "I saw you talking to Samuel by the river today," Clara began, her voice a soft murmur. Delphine's cheeks flushed a delicate shade of pink. "And I saw you at the forge, your eyes following Elias as if he were the only man in the world." A comfortable silence fell between them, the only sound the gentle rustling of the willow branches in the evening breeze. They had always been able to communicate without words, their twin bond a silent, intuitive language that only they could understand. "What are we to do, Clara?" Delphine finally whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of hope and despair. Clara took her sister's hand, her grip firm and reassuring. "We do what we have always done," she said, her voice filled with a newfound determination. "We find a way." But as they stood there, two young women on the cusp of a dangerous and uncertain future, they could not have known the storm that was about to break upon Belle Rêve. For their mother, Eleanor Devereaux, a woman whose eyes missed nothing, had begun to notice the lingering glances, the stolen moments, and the whispers in the willow. And she would stop at nothing to protect her family's name, even if it meant destroying her own daughter's happiness. The beautiful dream that was Belle Rêve was about to become a living nightmare. Eleanor Devereaux ruled Belle Rêve with an iron fist clad in a velvet glove. Her days were a meticulously planned schedule of managing the household, overseeing the plantation's ledgers, and maintaining the family's social standing. From the grand veranda, her watchful eyes missed nothing. She noticed the slight flush on Delphine's cheeks after a walk by the river, and the lingering scent of soot and iron that clung to Clara's riding habit after a visit to the stables, a visit that always seemed to coincide with Elias's work at the forge. She was a woman who understood the delicate dance of power and perception. In the stratified society of the antebellum South, a woman's reputation was her most valuable currency. A whisper of scandal, a hint of impropriety, could tarnish a family's name for generations. Her daughters, her beautiful, spirited daughters, were her legacy, their marriages the culmination of her life's work. She had already begun negotiations with the Vanderbilts and the Carringtons, two of the most prominent families in Tennessee. The unions would not only secure her daughter's futures, but would also merge lands and fortunes, solidifying the Devereux dynasty. The first inkling of trouble came in the form of a hushed conversation she overheard between two of the house slaves, hushed words about Miss Delphine's sweet smiles for that singing man. The words were a serpent's hiss in the Eden she had so carefully constructed. She had dismissed it at first, a fanciful notion born of idle gossip. But then she began to watch, her gaze sharp and calculating. She observed Delphine, her usually placid daughter, now possessed of a newfound, almost ethereal glow. She saw the way her eyes would drift towards the slave quarters in the evenings, a wistful expression on her face as Samuel's soulful voice filled the night air. And she saw Clara, her fiery, rebellious Clara, whose visits to the stables were becoming more frequent, her laughter echoing a little too loudly near the forge. One sweltering afternoon, Eleanor summoned Clara to her study, a room filled with heavy mahogany furniture and the lingering scent of her late husband's cigars. The air was thick with unspoken tension. "You've been spending a great deal of time at the stables of late," Eleanor began, her voice deceptively calm. Clara, perched on the edge of a brocade armchair, met her mother's gaze without flinching. "I enjoy riding, Mother." "Is that a crime?" "It is when your rides seem to conveniently end at the blacksmith's forge," Eleanor countered, her eyes narrowing. "The man has work to do, Clara. He does not need the distraction of the master's daughter." Clara's hands clenched in her lap. "Elias is a skilled artisan. I admire his work." "Is it his work you admire, or the man himself?" The question hung in the air, sharp and pointed as a shard of glass. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs, but she held her mother's gaze, her chin held high. "I will not be interrogated as if I were a common criminal." Eleanor rose from her chair, her movements slow and deliberate. She walked to the window, her back to her daughter. "You are a Devereux," she said, her voice a low, dangerous murmur. "You are a white woman of standing. Do you have any idea what a whisper of scandal could do to this family? To your future? To your sister's future?" "This has nothing to do with Delphine," Clara retorted, her voice rising. "It has everything to do with her." Eleanor whirled around, her carefully composed facade cracking to reveal the raw fury beneath. "You are twins, two halves of a whole in the eyes of society. Your actions reflect upon her as much as they do upon yourself. The Vanderbilts are a family of impeccable reputation. They will not tolerate any hint of impropriety." The mention of the Vanderbilts sent a chill down Clara's spine. The arranged marriages, once a distant, unpleasant thought, were now a looming threat. "I will not be sold like a prize mare at auction," Clara declared, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. "You will do as you are told." Eleanor's voice was cold as ice. "You will cease these admirations. You will conduct yourself as a Devereux, and you will prepare yourself to be a Vanderbilt. Is that understood?" Clara stood, her body rigid with defiance. "And if I refuse?" Eleanor's eyes, chips of blue ice, held no warmth. "Then you will learn the true meaning of obedience. I will not have this family's name dragged through the mud by a lovesick girl's foolish fantasies." The confrontation left Clara shaken, but not broken. The matriarch's watchful eye had seen too much, but it had not seen the depth of her daughter's resolve. The battle lines had been drawn. As Clara left the study, the heavy door clicking shut behind her, she knew that this was more than just a fight for her own heart. It was a fight for her sister, for the men they loved, and for a future that was their own to choose. The whispers in the willow were about to become a roar of defiance. The forge was a world of its own, a place of fire and shadow, where the rhythmic clang of hammer on anvil was a constant, percussive heartbeat. For Clara, it was a sanctuary, a place where the rigid conventions of her world seemed to melt away in the intense heat. And at the center of it all was Elias, his presence as powerful and elemental as the fire he commanded. He was a man of few words, his story etched not in a family Bible, but in the corded muscles of his arms and the quiet dignity of his gaze. He had been born at Belle Reve, his lineage as much a part of the plantation as the ancient oaks that dotted the landscape. He had learned the blacksmith's trade from his father, his hands, even as a young boy. possessing a strength and a skill that belied his years. Clara had been drawn to him for as long as she could remember, her childhood fascination with the sparks that flew from his anvil, evolving into a woman's deep and abiding love. She saw in him not a slave, but a man of immense strength and integrity, a man who bore his chains with a silent, stoic grace. After the confrontation with her mother, Clara's visits to the forge became more clandestine, stolen moments snatched under the cloak of twilight. She would feign a need for a mended bridle or a new set of horseshoes, her heart aflutter with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. One evening, as the last rays of sunlight filtered through the dusty windows of the forge, she found him alone, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the dying embers. "Elias," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He turned, his eyes dark pools of quiet strength meeting hers. "Miss Clara," he said, his voice a low rumble. I came to see the new gate you're crafting for the west pasture," she stammered, the excuse sounding feeble even to her own ears. He nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. He led her to a massive iron gate, its intricate scrollwork a testament to his artistry. It was a masterpiece of strength and beauty, a reflection of the man who had created it. "It's beautiful," she breathed, her fingers tracing the cool, smooth lines of the iron. "It will be strong," he said, his gaze fixed on her face. "It will keep what's inside safe." The words hung in the air between them, laden with a double meaning that was not lost on either of them. They were both prisoners in their own way, trapped within the gilded cage of Bel Rev. "Sometimes," Clara said, her voice soft, "the things we want to keep safe are not things at all." His eyes held hers, a silent acknowledgement of the truth of her words. In that moment, the carefully constructed barriers between them seemed to dissolve, leaving only the raw, undeniable connection that had long simmered beneath the surface. He took a step closer, the heat from the forge radiating from his body. He reached out, his calloused fingers gently brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. The touch was electric, a jolt of lightning that coursed through her veins. "Clara," he murmured, her name a prayer on his lips. It was the first time he had ever used her given name, a small but significant act of defiance. In that one word, he had shattered the invisible wall that separated master and slave. She leaned into his touch, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The world outside the forge, with its rigid rules and suffocating expectations, seemed to fade away. There was only the heat, the scent of soot and iron, and the man who held her heart in his strong, capable hands. He lowered his head, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was both tender and fierce, a kiss that tasted of fire and freedom. It was a kiss that sealed their forbidden bond, a bond forged in the heat of a shared rebellion. As they broke apart, breathless and trembling, they knew that there was no turning back. They had crossed a line, a dangerous, exhilarating line, and the consequences would be swift and severe. But in the dimly lit forge, with the embers of the fire casting long shadows on the walls, they had found something worth fighting for, something worth risking everything for. The forging of their love was complete, and now they would have to face the fire together. While Clara's love was forged in fire and iron, Delphine's blossomed in the cool, moonlit shadows of the weeping willow by the river. It was here in this tranquil haven that Samuel's music wove its spell, a melody of hope and sorrow that spoke to the deepest corners of her heart. Samuel was a man of contrasts. He possessed a physical strength honed by years of labor in the tobacco fields, yet his soul was that of a poet, his voice a vessel for the unspoken grief and yearning of his people. He had learned to play the guitar, a battered instrument passed down from his father, his fingers, though calloused from fieldwork, coaxing from it a sound that was both haunting and beautiful. Delphine would often steal away from the great house in the evenings, drawn by the magnetic pull of his music. She would sit on the riverbank, hidden by the long, trailing branches of the willow, and listen, her heart aching with a mixture of joy and sorrow. One night, as the full moon cast a silvery glow upon the water, she gathered her courage and stepped out from behind the curtain of leaves. Samuel, startled by her sudden appearance, stopped playing, his hand hovering over the strings of his guitar. "Please," she said, her voice a soft whisper, "don't stop." He looked at her, his eyes, dark and expressive, filled with a mixture of surprise and apprehension. It was one thing to share a fleeting glance or a whispered word in the daylight, but to be alone with her, here, in the intimate darkness of the night, was a dangerous transgression. "Miss Delphine," he said, his voice laced with a gentle warning. "You shouldn't be here." "I know," she replied, taking a step closer. "But I had to tell you, your music, it's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." A rare smile touched his lips, a fleeting glimmer of light in the darkness. "It's just old songs," he said, his voice filled with a self-deprecating humility. "No," she insisted, her gaze unwavering. "They're more than that. They're stories. They're truth." He looked down at his guitar, his fingers gently stroking the worn wood. "They're the only truth I'm allowed to speak." The words, spoken with a quiet resignation, pierced Delphine's heart. She suddenly saw the world through his eyes, a world of unimaginable hardship and injustice, a world where even a song could be an act of defiance. She sat down on the grass beside him, her silken dress a stark contrast to the rough spun cloth of his trousers. The silence that fell between them was not awkward, but filled with a comfortable intimacy. "Tell me about your songs," she said, her voice a gentle invitation. And so he did. He told her of the spirituals that his mother had sung to him as a child, songs of hope and deliverance. He told her of the work songs that echoed through the fields, their rhythms a testament to the enduring spirit of his people. And he told her of the songs he had written himself, songs of love and loss, of dreams deferred and hopes that refused to die. As he spoke, Delphine found herself falling deeper in love with him, not just with his music, but with the man himself, his kindness, his resilience, his gentle soul. He then began to play again, his voice a low, melodious baritone that wrapped around her like a warm embrace. He sang a song she had never heard before, a hauntingly beautiful melody about two stars, one bright and one dim, who loved each other from afar, knowing they could never touch. When he finished, tears were glistening in Delphine's eyes. She reached out, her hand covering his on the neck of the guitar. The touch was soft, a gentle caress that sent a shiver through them both. "Samuel," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. He looked at her, his eyes searching hers in the moonlight. He saw in them not pity, but a genuine and profound understanding. He saw a reflection of his own longing, his own desire for a love that dared to defy the boundaries of their world. He leaned in, his lips meeting hers in a kiss as gentle as the river's current. It was a kiss of shared dreams and whispered secrets, a kiss that promised a love as timeless as the stars above. In that moment, under the watchful eye of the moon, they were not master and slave, but two souls connected by a love that was as pure and as powerful as the music that had brought them together. But as the first light of dawn began to break on the horizon, they knew that their stolen serenade was over. They were once again trapped in a world that would never understand their love, a world that would do everything in its power to tear them apart. The sweet melody of their love had been played, but the harsh crescendo of reality was yet to come. The Vanderbilt Ball was the social event of the season, a glittering affair that brought together the wealthiest and most influential families in Nashville. For Eleanor Devereaux, it was the culmination of her carefully laid plans, the stage upon which her daughters would be officially presented to their future husbands. The great house at Belle Reve was abuzz with preparations. Gowns of silk and satin were laid out, jewels were polished, and the air was filled with the scent of expensive perfume and nervous anticipation. Clara and Delphine moved through the preparations in a daze, their minds a world away from the frivolous concerns of society. Their hearts were with Elias and Samuel, their secret love a stark contrast to the hollow charade they were being forced to play. The night of the ball arrived, a spectacle of opulence and excess. The Vanderbilt mansion was ablaze with candlelight, the sound of laughter and music spilling out into the warm night air. Clara, clad in a gown of emerald green that matched the fire in her eyes, danced with the stuffy and self-important John Vanderbilt, his conversation a tedious monologue about his prized horses and his vast fortune. Delphine, a vision in pale blue, endured the fawning attentions of William Carrington, a man whose condescending smiles and wandering hands made her skin crawl. She felt like a porcelain doll on display, her every move scrutinized, her every word measured. Later that evening, seeking a respite from the suffocating atmosphere of the ballroom, the twins slipped out onto a secluded balcony overlooking the manicured gardens. The cool night air was a welcome relief. "I cannot do this, Delphine," Clara said, her voice a frustrated whisper. "I cannot marry a man I despise, a man who sees me as nothing more than a pretty bauble to adorn his arm." "I know," Delphine replied, her own heart aching with a similar despair. "But what choice do we have? Mother will never relent." As they stood there, lost in their own desperate thoughts, they were unaware that they were not alone. John Vanderbilt, his pride wounded by Clara's abrupt departure from the dance floor, had followed them onto the balcony, his footsteps silent on the cold stone. He stood in the shadows, his ears straining to catch their hushed conversation. "There has to be a way," Clara insisted, her voice filled with a desperate urgency. "A way for us to be with the men we love." Delphine's breath caught in her throat. "Clara, be careful," she warned, her eyes darting nervously towards the ballroom. "I don't care who hears," Clara declared, her voice rising with a reckless abandon. "I love Elias. I will not give him up. And I love Samuel," Delphine confessed, her own voice barely a whisper, but in the stillness of the night, it was as loud as a thunderclap. In the shadows, John Vanderbilt's eyes widened in disbelief. The Devereaux twins, the darlings of Nashville society, in love with slaves? It was a scandal of epic proportions, a delicious piece of gossip that would set the city ablaze. A cruel smile spread across his face. He had been looking for a way to put the haughty Clara Devereaux in her place, and now she had handed him the perfect weapon. He slipped away from the balcony, his mind already racing with the possibilities. He would not confront them directly, not yet. He would let the secret fester, a poison that would slowly seep into the foundations of the Devereaux family. He would bide his time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, the moment when the unveiling of their secret would cause the most damage. Unaware of the serpent they had just unleashed, Clara and Delphine returned to the ballroom, a newfound resolve in their hearts. They had spoken their love aloud, a declaration of war against the world that sought to keep them apart. They did not yet know that their enemy was no longer just their mother, but the entire unforgiving society in which they lived. The secret that had once been their solace was about to become their undoing. The beautiful dream of Belle Rêve was on the verge of shattering into a million pieces. The whispers started subtly, a rustle of silk here, a raised eyebrow there. At first, Eleanor Devereaux dismissed them as the usual idle chatter of Nashville's elite. But the whispers grew, morphing from hushed innuendos into pointed, malicious gossip. The Devereaux name, once a symbol of respectability and power, was now being sullied in the drawing rooms and verandas of the city's most influential families. The final blow came in the form of a letter, an anonymous missive left on the silver platter in the entrance hall. The script was elegant, the words venomous. It spoke of unnatural affections and a stain upon the honor of a good family. It hinted at the Vanderbilt ball, at a conversation overheard on a moonlit balcony. Eleanor read the letter in the cold morning light of her study, her hands trembling with a rage so profound it threatened to consume her. The blood drained from her face, leaving it a mask of cold fury. Her worst fears had been realized. Her daughters, her own flesh and blood, had brought this shame upon their house. She summoned them to the study, the heavy doors closing behind them with an ominous thud. The room was dark, the curtains drawn against the morning sun. Eleanor stood by the fireplace, the letter clutched in her hand, her silhouette a menacing figure in the gloom. "Do you know what this is?" she asked, her voice a low, dangerous hiss. Clara and Delphine exchanged a nervous glance. They had noticed the change in their mother's demeanor, the icy silence that had descended upon the house. "It is the ruin of this family," Eleanor continued, her voice rising with each word. "It is the end of everything I have worked to build." She threw the letter onto the polished mahogany desk. "Read it," she commanded. Clara picked it up, her eyes scanning the cruel, looping script. Her face paled as she read the words, the same words that had been whispered on the balcony, now twisted into a vicious accusation. She passed the letter to Delphine. whose gentle face crumpled with a mixture of fear and sorrow. "It's not true," Delphine whispered, her voice trembling. "Not true?" Eleanor's laughter was a harsh, brittle sound. "Do not lie to me. I have seen it in your eyes, in your stolen glances, in your secret meetings. You have been consorting with the help, with property, like common trollops." The word struck Clara like a physical blow. "How dare you?" she seethed, her own anger rising to meet her mother's. "You speak of love as if it were a common transaction, a matter of property and standing. You know nothing of love." "I know of duty," Eleanor retorted, her hand striking the desk with a resounding crack. "I know of honor. I know of the sacrifices I have made to ensure your futures you have so carelessly thrown away on a stable boy and a field hand." "They are men," Clara cried, her voice filled with a passionate intensity. "They are good, honorable men, more honorable than any of the simpering fools you would have us marry. They are slaves," Eleanor's voice was cold and final. "And you are Devereux's. That is the only truth that matters." She paced the room like a caged tigress, her mind already working, calculating, planning. "This will be dealt with," she said, her voice dropping to a chilling whisper. "The source of this infatuation will be removed." A cold dread washed over the twins. "What are you going to do?" Delphine asked, her voice barely audible. Eleanor turned to face them, her eyes devoid of any maternal warmth. "I am going to save this family," she said, her voice flat and emotionless. "Elias and Samuel will be sold. They will be sent so far away that you will never see them again." The words were a death sentence. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, the carefully constructed walls of their lives crumbling around them. "No," Clara choked out, a single word of defiance against a tide of despair. "It is already done," Eleanor stated, a cruel finality in her tone. "The arrangements have been made. They will be gone by morning." She turned her back on them, a clear dismissal. The audience was over. The matriarch had spoken. As Clara and Delphine stumbled out of the study, their hearts shattered, they knew that their mother's fury was not just a passing storm. It was a hurricane, a destructive force that would leave nothing but devastation in its wake. The beautiful dream of Belle Reve had been consumed by a mother's rage, and the dawn would bring a new, unbearable reality. The news of Elias and Samuel's impending sale spread through the slave quarters like a wildfire, a wave of despair that extinguished the last embers of hope. The air, usually filled with the soulful melodies of Samuel's guitar, was now heavy with a suffocating silence. Clara and Delphine were confined to their rooms, prisoners in their own home. Their mother had posted guards at their doors, ensuring that they could not interfere with her plans. But Eleanor Devereux had underestimated the strength of her daughter's love, the depth of their resolve. As darkness fell upon Belle Reve, Clara, her mind sharp with a desperate clarity, began to formulate a plan. She knew the layout of the house, the secret passages and hidden stairways that her father had shown her as a child. She knew the routines of the guards, the moments when their vigilance would be at its weakest. She waited until the house was still, the only sound the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. She slipped out of her room, a shadow in the moonlight, and made her way to Delphine's door. A few whispered words, a shared look of determination, and the twins were united in their purpose. They moved through the darkened house like ghosts, their bare feet silent on the polished wood floors. They made their way to the kitchen, where they found Martha, the head cook, a woman whose kind heart and wise eyes had always been a source of comfort to them. "We need your help," Clara whispered, her voice urgent. Martha looked at the two young women, their faces pale and drawn in the dim light of a single candle. She had heard the news, her own heart aching for the two young men who were to be torn from their home, from the women they loved. Without a word, she nodded, her loyalty to the twins overriding her fear of their mother. She gave them a bundle of food and a small pouch of coins, a meager offering for the uncertain journey that lay ahead. She also gave them a warning. "The slave catchers will be on your trail before the sun is up. You must be careful." The twins then made their way to the slave quarters, their hearts pounding with a mixture of hope and fear. They found Elias and Samuel in the small, cramped cabin they shared, their faces etched with a profound sorrow. "We're leaving," Clara announced, her voice a firm, unwavering command. "Tonight." Elias and Samuel looked at them, their eyes wide with disbelief. To run was to risk everything: the brutal punishment of the whip, the even more certain fate of being sold to the deep south, a living hell from which few returned. "It's too dangerous," Elias said, his voice a low rumble of concern. "It's more dangerous to stay," Clara countered, her gaze meeting his with an intensity that left no room for argument. "We will not let them tear us apart." In that moment, a shared understanding passed between the four of them. They were no longer master and slave, but four souls united by a love that defied the boundaries of their world. They were fugitives, their lives now intertwined in a desperate bid for freedom. Under the cloak of darkness, they slipped away from Belle Reve, the place that had been both their home and their prison. They moved through the familiar fields of tobacco, the leaves rustling in the night breeze like a whispered farewell. They made their way to the river, the same river where Delphine and Samuel had shared their first kiss, its current now a pathway to an unknown future. They found a small, weathered skiff hidden among the reeds, a boat that Elias had secretly repaired for just such an occasion. As they pushed off from the shore, the great house of Belle Reve, its windows dark and imposing, receded into the distance. They were four fugitives on a dark and treacherous river, their only guide the North Star, a distant, shimmering promise of freedom. They did not know what lay ahead, what dangers they would face, what sacrifices they would have to make. But as they huddled together in the small boat, their hands clasped in a bond of love and defiance, they were no longer afraid. They had chosen their own destiny, and they would face it together. The daring escape from Belle Reve was not an end, but a beginning. The first chapter in a new story, a story they would write for themselves. The river became their world, a winding, unpredictable path that carried them deeper into the unknown. The days were spent hidden in the dense foliage of the riverbanks, the skiff carefully concealed from the prying eyes of the slave patrols that scoured the waterways. The nights were a blur of hushed whispers and the rhythmic dip of oars in the dark water. Fear was their constant companion, a gnawing presence that tightened its grip with every strange sound, every distant light. The stories of escaped slaves being hunted down by bloodhounds, of the brutal punishments inflicted upon those who were caught, were a chilling reality that haunted their every waking moment. But fear was not their only companion. Love, a fierce and resilient love, was the fire that warmed them in the cold, damp nights, the fuel that propelled them forward when their bodies ached with exhaustion. Clara and Elias, their bond forged in the heat of rebellion, found strength in each other's presence. A shared glance, a touch of a hand, was enough to reignite their courage. Delphine and Samuel, their love a gentle, steady flame, found solace in quiet moments of shared silence, their hearts communicating in a language that needed no words. The journey was a crucible that tested the limits of their endurance. They faced hunger, their meager supply of food dwindling with each passing day. They battled the elements, a sudden storm turning the placid river into a raging torrent that threatened to capsize their small boat. They navigated the treacherous currents of the river and the even more treacherous currents of a society that saw them as nothing more than property. One night, as they huddled together on a small, secluded island, the sound of barking dogs echoed in the distance. Panic seized them, a cold, suffocating terror. The slave catchers were close, their relentless pursuit a tangible threat in the darkness. Elias, his face a grim mask of determination, took charge. "We have to split up," he said, his voice a low, urgent command. "It's our only chance." The idea of separating was unthinkable, a tearing of the fragile tapestry of their newfound freedom. But they knew he was right. 4 fugitives were easier to track than 2. "Clara and I will head west," Elias continued, his gaze fixed on the dense, unforgiving wilderness that bordered the river. "We'll create a false trail, draw them away from the river. You and Samuel," he said, turning to Delphine, "continue north. Follow the river. It will lead you to freedom." The farewell was a hurried, desperate affair, a jumble of whispered promises and tearful embraces. Clara clung to her sister, the fear of never seeing her again a sharp physical pain. "Be safe," Delphine whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "You too," Clara replied, her own voice trembling. "We'll find each other again, I promise." As Clara and Elias disappeared into the dark woods, Delphine and Samuel were left alone in the vast, intimidating wilderness. The weight of their new reality, the immense and terrifying burden of their freedom, settled upon them. They pushed off from the island, their small boat once again at the mercy of the river's current. The sound of the barking dogs faded into the distance, but the fear remained, a constant, chilling reminder of the world they had left behind. They were two souls adrift in a hostile world, their love their only compass, their courage their only shield. The perilous journey north had taken a new, more dangerous turn. They had been torn from their companions, their future more uncertain than ever. But as they looked at each other, their eyes reflecting the silvery light of the moon, they knew that they would not give up. They would continue to fight, for their love, for their freedom, and for the promise of a new life, a life where they could be together, finally and forever. Days turned into a week, a grueling, soul-crushing week of near starvation and constant, heart-pounding fear. Delphine and Samuel traveled by night, their bodies aching with a weariness that went beyond mere physical exhaustion. The river, once a symbol of escape, now felt like an endless, monotonous prison. Hope, a fragile flame, was beginning to flicker. One evening, as they were about to push their skiff back into the water, a faint light appeared in the distance, a single warm pinprick in the vast, indifferent darkness. It was a lantern hanging from the porch of a small, isolated farmhouse. Samuel, his instincts honed by a lifetime of caution, immediately suggested they move on. A farmhouse meant people, and people meant danger. But Delphine, her spirit weary but not yet broken, felt a strange pull towards the light, a desperate, irrational hope that it might be a sign of salvation. "Let's just watch for a while," she pleaded, her hand on his arm. From a distance, they concealed themselves in the thick underbrush, their eyes fixed on the small house. The lantern cast a gentle, welcoming glow on the porch, a stark contrast to the harsh, unforgiving world they had been navigating. An elderly man, his face kind and weathered, emerged from the house and sat on the porch swing, a Bible in his hands. He began to read aloud, his voice a calm, soothing presence in the quiet night. The words were from the book of Isaiah. "I will lead the blind by ways they have not known. Along unfamiliar paths I will guide them. I will turn the darkness into light before them and make the rough places smooth." The words, a message of hope and deliverance, seemed to be speaking directly to them. A new, more powerful feeling began to replace their fear, a cautious, tentative trust. They waited until the old man had finished his reading and had gone back inside. Then, with their hearts in their throats, they approached the house. Delphine, her hand trembling, knocked on the rough wooden door. The door opened, and the old man stood before them, the lantern light illuminating his gentle, compassionate face. He was a Quaker, a member of a religious society known for their pacifism, their belief in the equality of all people, and their active role in the Underground Railroad. He looked at the two young fugitives, their clothes tattered, their faces gaunt with hunger and fear. He saw not a white woman and a black man, but two of God's children in desperate need of help. "Thee are welcome here," he said, his voice filled with a quiet, unwavering kindness. He used the traditional Quaker form of address, a small but significant sign that he saw them as equals. He led them inside to a small, immaculately clean kitchen, where a fire crackled warmly in the hearth. His wife, a woman with the same kind eyes as her husband, was there to greet them. She said nothing, but her actions spoke volumes. She immediately set about preparing a meal for them, a simple but hearty stew that smelled like heaven. As they ate, their first real meal in over a week, a sense of overwhelming relief washed over them. For the first time since they had fled Belle Reve, they felt safe. The Quaker, whose name was Jedediah, and his wife Sarah, listened to their story with a quiet, compassionate attention. They did not ask for details, for they knew that the story of one escaped slave was the story of them all. "Thee will be safe here for a time," Jedediah said when they had finished. "Rest, regain thy strength, and then we will help thee on thy way." He showed them to a small, hidden room in the cellar, a safe haven for the many fugitives who had passed through their home on their way to freedom. The room was small, but it was clean and warm, a sanctuary from the harsh world outside. As Delphine and Samuel lay down on the simple straw mattress, the weight of their journey, the constant fear and uncertainty, finally lifted. They were not alone anymore. They had found a glimmer of hope in the Quaker's lantern, a beacon of light in the darkness. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, they allowed themselves to believe that they might actually make it. The path ahead was still fraught with danger, but now they had allies, and with their help, they would continue their fight for freedom, their love a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. Back in Nashville, the scandal of the Devereaux twins had exploded, fueled by the venomous whispers of John Vanderbilt. The story, embellished with each retelling, was now the talk of the town, a delicious morsel of gossip that was savored in every drawing room and on every veranda. The Devereaux name, once a symbol of Southern aristocracy, was now synonymous with disgrace. Eleanor Devereaux found herself a pariah, the invitations to social gatherings ceasing, her once frequent visitors now conspicuously absent. She was a woman drowning in the shame of her daughter's actions, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. But Eleanor was not a woman to surrender to despair. Her grief quickly hardened into a cold, vengeful fury. Her daughters had defied her, had shamed her, and now they would pay the price. And the men who had bewitched them, they would pay an even dearer price. She summoned the most ruthless slave catcher in the state, a man known only as the Hunter, a man whose reputation for brutality was as vast as the lands he patrolled. He was a tall, gaunt figure, with cold, dead eyes and a cruel twist to his lips. "I want them found," Eleanor said, her voice a low, chilling command. The girl, Clara, and the man she ran with, Elias. "I don't care about the other two. They are a lost cause, but Clara, she will be brought back. She will be made to understand the consequences of her actions." She offered him a sum of money so large that it made even the Hunter's cold eyes glint with avarice. "And the man," she added, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "I want him made an example of. I want him to suffer." The Hunter smiled, a slow, predatory smile that revealed a set of stained, broken teeth. "Consider it done, ma'am," he said, his voice a gravelly rasp. And so, the hunt began. The Hunter, with his pack of vicious, half-starved dogs, set out on the trail of the fugitives. He was a relentless tracker, a man who seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to read the signs of the wilderness. He found their trail by the river, the faint impressions of their footprints in the soft mud. He found the place where they had split up, the tracks of 2 pairs of feet heading west into the dense, unforgiving forest. Clara and Elias, meanwhile, were fighting a desperate battle for survival. The wilderness was a harsh and unforgiving world, a world of tangled undergrowth, venomous snakes, and the constant gnawing pangs of hunger. They had managed to create a false trail, hoping to lead their pursuers on a wild goose chase. But they knew that it was only a matter of time before a skilled tracker would see through their ruse. They moved with a desperate urgency, their bodies pushed to the limits of their endurance. The love that had once been a source of strength was now tinged with a constant, underlying fear. They were no longer just 2 lovers defying a prejudiced world. They were fugitives, hunted animals, their every step a gamble with their lives. One afternoon, as they were foraging for berries, the sound they had been dreading finally reached them, the distant, blood-curdling baying of hounds. The hunt was on. Panic, cold and sharp, seized them. They ran, their feet pounding the forest floor, the branches of the trees clawing at their faces and clothes. The barking grew louder, closer, a terrifying, relentless chorus of doom. They came to a rocky outcrop, a sheer cliff face that offered no escape. They were trapped, their backs to the wall, the sound of the approaching dogs and the shouts of their pursuers echoing through the trees. Elias, his chest heaving, his face a mask of grim determination, turned to Clara. "There's a small cave," he said, his voice urgent, "just below the ridge. Hide there. Don't make a sound." "No," she cried, her voice filled with a desperate protest. "I won't leave you." "You must," he insisted, his hands gripping her shoulders. "I will lead them away. They want me, not you." He pressed a quick, desperate kiss to her lips. "I love you," he whispered. "Now go." With tears streaming down her face, Clara scrambled down the rocks and squeezed into the small, dark crevice of the cave. She watched as Elias, armed with a heavy branch, stood at the top of the ridge, a defiant silhouette against the fading light. The hunter and his men burst through the trees, their dogs straining at their leashes, their fangs bared. Elias fought with the strength of a cornered lion, his makeshift weapon a blur of motion. But he was one man against many, his courage no match for their guns and their numbers. From her hiding place, Clara watched in horror as he was overwhelmed, as he was beaten and bound, his proud spirit finally broken by the brutal force of his captors. The hunter, his face flushed with the thrill of the chase, stood over the fallen Elias. A cruel smile spread across his face. He had his prize. As they dragged Elias away, a broken and defeated figure, Clara was left alone in the cold, dark cave, her heart a gaping wound of grief and despair. The serpent's venom had found its mark. Her love, her freedom, her future, it had all been snatched away in a maelstrom of violence and hatred. The world, once again, had been plunged into darkness, and this time she feared there would be no dawn. For a few precious weeks, the Quaker farmhouse was a haven of peace and tranquility for Delphine and Samuel. In the gentle, compassionate company of Jedediah and Sarah, they began to heal, the physical and emotional wounds of their journey slowly starting to mend. Delphine, her hands once soft and unblemished, now calloused and scarred, learned the simple, satisfying rhythms of farm life. She helped Sarah in the garden, her fingers finding a strange comfort in the feel of the cool, dark earth. She learned to cook, to mend, to find a sense of purpose in the small, everyday tasks that had once been performed for her by others. Samuel, his spirit no longer burdened by the constant fear of the whip, found his voice again. In the evenings, he would sit on the porch with Jedediah, his guitar in his hands, his music a soulful expression of gratitude and hope. He worked alongside the old Quaker in the fields, the shared labor a bond that transcended the barriers of race and circumstance. In this small, isolated sanctuary, they were not a white woman and a black man, but simply Delphine and Samuel. Two people in love, their relationship allowed to blossom in the warm, nurturing light of acceptance. They spoke of the future, a future they had once dared not even dream of. A future in a place called Canada, where they would be free, where they could build a life together. But the world they had fled was not so easily escaped. The serpent's venom, having poisoned the lives of Clara and Elias, was now slithering its way north, its insidious tendrils reaching for the fragile peace of the Quaker sanctuary. One quiet afternoon, as Delphine was feeding the chickens, a lone rider appeared on the horizon, his horse kicking up a cloud of dust on the long country road. A sense of unease, a cold premonition of doom, settled upon her. The rider was a neighbor, his face grim, his eyes filled with a mixture of pity and fear. "Jedediah," he said, his voice urgent. "There's a slave catcher in town, a man they called the Hunter. He's been asking questions, offering a reward for two runaways, a white woman and a black man." The word struck Delphine like a physical blow. The sanctuary was no longer safe. The outside world, with its hatred and its prejudice, had found them. Jedediah's face, usually a picture of calm serenity, was now etched with a deep concern. He knew of the Hunter, a man who operated outside the law, a man for whom the sanctity of a Quaker home meant nothing. "Thee must leave," he said, his voice firm. "Tonight." The farewell was a hurried, sorrowful affair. Sarah packed them a bundle of food, her hands trembling, her eyes filled with tears. "May the Lord watch over thee," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Jedediah gave them a map, a crudely drawn but invaluable guide to the next safe house on the Underground Railroad. "Follow the river," he instructed, his voice a low, urgent whisper, "and pray that the darkness will be thy friend." As Delphine and Samuel slipped away from the farmhouse under the cloak of darkness, the sanctuary they had come to love now a place of danger, a profound sense of despair washed over them. They were once again fugitives, their brief respite from fear now just a bittersweet memory. They had not gone more than a mile when they heard the sound they had been dreading, the baying of hounds, the same blood-curdling sound that had heralded the capture of Elias. The Hunter, his instincts as sharp as a razor, had not been fooled by the neighbor's feigned ignorance. He had sensed the lie, had seen the fear in the man's eyes. He had found his prey. The chase was a desperate, terrifying ordeal. Delphine and Samuel ran through the dark woods, their lungs burning, their hearts pounding with a primal fear. The barking grew louder, closer, the sounds of their pursuers a symphony of terror. They came to a wide, fast-flowing river, its dark waters a seemingly impassable barrier. They were trapped, their escape route cut off. "I can't swim," Delphine cried, her voice filled with a desperate panic. Samuel, his mind racing, saw their only chance. A large fallen log stretched part of the way across the river, a precarious bridge to a small, rocky island in the middle of the current. "We have to try," he said, his voice a firm command. "It's our only hope." He helped her onto the slippery log, his strong hands guiding her as she inched her way across. The river churned below them, a black, hungry maw. They had almost reached the island when the hunter and his men burst through the trees, their lanterns casting long, menacing shadows on the water. "There they are!" a voice shouted. A gunshot rang out, the sound echoing through the night. Samuel cried out, a sharp, agonizing cry, and stumbled, his hand clutching his leg. He had been hit. He lost his footing on the slippery log and fell into the raging river, the current immediately pulling him under. "Samuel!" Delphine screamed, her voice a raw, primal cry of anguish. She watched in horror as he was swept away by the current, his head bobbing once, twice, before disappearing into the darkness. She was left alone on the small, rocky island, a desolate figure in the middle of the raging river. Her world shattered. Her love, her hope, her future, all washed away in the cold, unforgiving waters. The sanctuary had been shattered, and with it, her heart. The night, once a friend, was now an endless, suffocating void of despair. The hunter, his prize snatched from him by the river's current, was a man consumed by a frustrated rage. He had lost the man, but he still had the woman. And Eleanor Devereaux had made it clear that she wanted her daughter back. Delphine, stranded on the small island, was easily captured. She was in a state of shock, her mind a numb, mercifully blank canvas. The world around her, the rough hands that bound her, the jeering voices of her captors, it was all a distant, meaningless blur. The journey back to Belle Reve was a silent, torturous ordeal. Delphine was a ghost, her eyes vacant, her spirit broken. She had lost everything, her love, her freedom, and the sister who had been her other half. When she arrived back at the plantation, she was no longer a daughter returning home, but a prisoner returning to her cell. Her mother, her face a mask of cold, unforgiving fury, met her at the door. "You have brought shame upon this house," Eleanor said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "You will be confined to your room. You will have time to reflect on your sins." Delphine's room, once a sanctuary of light and beauty, was now a gilded cage. The windows were barred, the door locked from the outside. She was a prisoner in her own home, her only companions the ghosts of her past and the suffocating weight of her grief. Days turned into weeks, the passage of time marked only by the changing patterns of light on the floor. She did not eat, she did not sleep. She simply sat by the barred window, her gaze fixed on the distant river, the place where her love had been so cruelly extinguished. Her mother's punishment was not just physical confinement. It was a slow, deliberate psychological torture. She was denied any news of the outside world, any word of her sister or of Elias. She was left to fester in her own despair, her mind a fertile ground for the seeds of hopelessness. One evening, Martha, the cook, her heart breaking for the young woman who was wasting away in her gilded cage, defied Eleanor's orders and snuck into Delphine's room. She brought with her a small bowl of broth and a piece of news that she hoped would either break the spell of Delphine's grief or give her a reason to live. "Miss Delphine," she whispered, her voice filled with a gentle urgency, "you must eat. You must be strong." Delphine turned her vacant eyes towards the old woman. "Why?" she asked, her voice a hoarse, unused whisper. "There is nothing left to be strong for." "There is," Martha insisted, her eyes filled with a fierce determination. "Your sister, she needs you." The mention of Clara's name was the first spark of life in Delphine's deadened eyes. "Clara?" she whispered. Is she alive? She is, Martha confirmed. But they brought the man, Elias, back. Your mother. She means to make an example of him. The news was a double-edged sword, a sliver of hope followed by a fresh wave of terror. Clara was alive, but Elias was in mortal danger. What are they going to do to him? Delphine asked, her voice trembling. Martha's eyes filled with a sorrowful pity. There's to be a public spectacle, she said, her voice barely a whisper. A punishment, to remind everyone of the natural order of things. The words, a veiled reference to the brutal reality of a public whipping, perhaps even a hanging, sent a chill of horror through Delphine's veins. She thought of her fiery, defiant sister, forced to witness the suffering of the man she loved. The spark of life that had been ignited in Delphine's eyes now blazed into a fire of pure, unadulterated rage. Her grief, her despair, it was all consumed by a new, powerful emotion, a burning desire for revenge. Her mother had taken everything from her, her love, her freedom, her sister's happiness. And now, she was going to pay. Delphine picked up the bowl of broth and began to eat, her movements slow and deliberate. She would be strong. She would find a way out of her gilded cage. And she would make her mother regret the day she had ever underestimated the love of her daughters. The broken porcelain doll was about to be reassembled, not as a pretty bauble but as a weapon, sharp and deadly. The day of Elias's punishment dawned, a gray, cheerless day that mirrored the mood of Belle Rêve. A makeshift platform had been erected in the center of the main yard, a stage for the brutal theater that was about to unfold. Eleanor Devereaux had made the event mandatory for all her slaves, a cruel and calculated display of power designed to extinguish any lingering embers of rebellion. Clara was dragged from her own confinement, her arms held in a vice-like grip by two of the overseers. Her face was a mask of stoic defiance, but her eyes, wild with a desperate fear, betrayed the turmoil within. She was forced to stand at the foot of the platform, a place where she would have an unobstructed view of the horror that was to come. Elias was led out, his hands bound, his head held high. He met Clara's gaze, a silent message of love and courage passing between them. He would not give them the satisfaction of seeing him break. Eleanor Devereaux stood on the veranda of the great house, a regal, imposing figure looking down upon the scene she had orchestrated. A cold, triumphant smile played on her lips. This was her victory, the restoration of her authority, the reassertion of the natural order. But she had failed to account for one thing, the fury of a woman scorned, a woman who had nothing left to lose. Just as the overseer raised his whip, a figure appeared on the veranda, a ghost from the past, a specter of defiance. It was Delphine, her eyes, once the color of a summer sky, now burning with the cold blue fire of a winter storm. She held in her hand a small, pearl-handled pistol, a dueling pistol that had belonged to her father. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Eleanor whirled around, her face a mixture of shock and disbelief. "Delphine," she hissed, "what is the meaning of this? Go back to your room." "My room?" Delphine's laughter was a harsh, brittle sound. "You mean my cage? No, Mother, I will not be caged anymore." She raised the pistol, her hand steady, her aim true. "This ends now," she said, her voice ringing with a chilling clarity. Panic erupted. The overseers, their attention diverted by the new, unexpected threat, loosened their grip on Clara. In that moment of confusion, Clara acted. With a strength born of desperation, she broke free, snatched a dropped whip from the ground, and lunged at the men who held Elias. The scene descended into chaos. The slaves, their fear momentarily forgotten, their spirits ignited by the unexpected rebellion of the master's daughters, surged forward. Delphine, her eyes locked on her mother's, cocked the pistol. "You took everything from me," she said, her voice a low, venomous whisper. "You took my love. You took my sister. You took my life." Eleanor, for the first time in her life, looked afraid. She saw in her daughter's eyes not the gentle, placid Delphine she had always known, but a stranger, a woman consumed by a righteous fury. "Think of what you are doing," Eleanor pleaded, her voice a desperate attempt to reason with the unreasonable. Think of the family name. The family name? Delphine's smile was a cruel, twisted thing. The family name is already in ruins, thanks to you. The sound of the gunshot was a deafening crack in the tense silence. But it was not Delphine's pistol that had fired. It was another, from the edge of the crowd. Eleanor Devereaux crumpled to the ground, a look of stunned surprise on her face, a single dark red stain blossoming on the bodice of her pristine white dress. The crowd parted, and a figure emerged from the chaos. It was Samuel, his leg bandaged, his face grim, his hand holding a smoking pistol. He had not drowned in the river. He had been pulled from the current by a group of runaway slaves who had been hiding in the woods. They had nursed him back to health, and together they had made their way back to Belle Reve, drawn by the news of Elias's impending punishment. The reckoning had come. The matriarch of Belle Reve, the architect of so much pain and suffering, lay dead on the veranda of her own home. The reign of terror was over. In the stunned silence that followed, Clara, Delphine, Elias, and Samuel stood together, four figures united in their rebellion, their faces a mixture of shock, relief, and a dawning, uncertain hope. The old world had been shattered. Now they had to build a new one, a world where love was not a crime, a world where freedom was not a distant dream, but a hard-won reality. The death of Eleanor Devereaux was the spark that ignited a firestorm. The carefully constructed hierarchy of Belle Reve, a system built on fear and oppression, crumbled in an instant. The overseers, their authority gone, their source of power lying dead on the veranda, fled into the woods, their own fear now a palpable thing. The slaves, their chains broken not by a proclamation but by a single defiant act, were now free. But freedom was a strange, disorienting thing. It was a word they had whispered in their prayers, a dream they had harbored in the deepest corners of their hearts. But now that it was a reality, it was a terrifying, uncertain prospect. In the chaotic aftermath of the reckoning, it was Clara who took charge. Her fiery spirit, once a source of rebellion, was now a beacon of leadership. She gathered the newly freed people together, her voice, clear and strong, cutting through the confusion. "Belle Reve is no more," she declared, her gaze sweeping over the faces of the people who had been born and bred into a life of servitude. "This is our home now. We will build a new community here, a community built not on fear, but on freedom and equality." It was a daunting task. The world outside the gates of Belle Reve was still a hostile one. The news of the uprising would soon reach Nashville, and the authorities would be swift and brutal in their response. But they had a fighting chance. Elias, his strength and his quiet wisdom a grounding force, organized the men into a makeshift militia, their tools of labor now their weapons of defense. Samuel, his music a source of solace and inspiration, became the voice of their new community, his songs telling the story of their struggle and their triumph. Delphine, her heart still heavy with the grief of her mother's death, a death she had inadvertently caused, found her own purpose in healing. She turned the great house, once a symbol of oppression, into a hospital, her gentle hands tending to the wounds, both physical and emotional, of the people who had suffered for so long. They worked together, black and white, side by side, their shared struggle forging a new kind of family, a family bound not by blood, but by a shared dream of a better world. They harvested the tobacco, not for a master's profit, but for their own survival. They shared the food, the labor, the joys, and the sorrows. But the outside world could not be kept at bay for long. A posse, led by the local sheriff, a man whose pockets were lined with the money of the wealthy planters, arrived at the gates of Belle Reve. They had come to restore order, to put down the rebellion, to put the property back in its place. They were met not by a disorganized mob of frightened slaves, but by a community of determined, armed men and women, their faces set with a grim resolve. The battle for Belle Reve was a short, bloody affair. The posse, confident in their superiority, was taken by surprise by the ferocity of the resistance. In the end, it was the fire that was their undoing. A stray lantern, knocked over in the heat of the battle, set the dry tobacco fields ablaze. The fire, fanned by the wind, spread with a terrifying speed, consuming the fields, the barns, the slave quarters, and finally, the great house itself. As the sun set on the smoldering ruins of Belle Reve, the survivors, their faces blackened with soot, their eyes reflecting the dancing flames, stood together in a somber silence. Their home, their sanctuary, was gone. But from the ashes of Bel Rev, a new hope was born. They were no longer bound to the land, no longer tied to the ghosts of their past. They were free, truly free, to make their own way in the world. They were a small, resilient band of survivors, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. They had lost their home, but they had found something far more valuable: their freedom. And as they turned their backs on the smoking ruins of their past and set their faces towards the north, towards the promise of a new life, they knew that their journey was far from over. But they would face it together, their love, their courage, and their hope, a fire that could never be extinguished. The journey north was a long and arduous one, a pilgrimage of hope and resilience. The small band of survivors from Bel Rev, a mosaic of black and white faces, traveled under the cover of darkness, their path guided by the North Star and the secret network of the Underground Railroad. They were led by Clara and Elias, their love, once a forbidden secret, now a symbol of their new, integrated world. They were inspired by the music of Samuel, his songs a chronicle of their journey, a testament to their enduring spirit. They were healed by the gentle hands of Delphine, her compassion a balm to their weary souls. They faced countless dangers along the way: slave catchers, treacherous terrain, the constant threat of discovery. But they were no longer a group of frightened fugitives. They were a community, a family, their bonds forged in the fires of rebellion and the shared hardships of their journey. They finally crossed the border into Canada, the land of freedom, the land they had only dared to dream of. The air itself seemed different, lighter, cleaner, free from the stench of oppression. They settled in a small, welcoming community of former slaves and abolitionists, a place where the color of one's skin did not determine one's worth. It was a hard life, a life of struggle and sacrifice, but it was a life of their own choosing. Clara and Elias were married in a simple ceremony under the vast open sky, their vows a testament to a love that had defied a world of prejudice. Delphine and Samuel, their love story a symphony of sorrow and joy, found their own happiness in the quiet, simple rhythms of their new life. The story of the Tennessee twins and their forbidden union became a legend, a story whispered in the secret networks of the Underground Railroad, a story of hope and defiance that inspired countless others to seek their own freedom. Bel Rev, the beautiful dream, was now just a distant memory, a ghost of a past that seemed a world away. But the love that had been born within its oppressive walls, the love that had shattered its foundations and had risen from its ashes, that love endured. It was a love that had been forged in the crucible of a forbidden union, a love that had survived the fire, a love that had finally found its home in the dawn of a new day. The legacy of the Tennessee twins was not one of shame and scandal, but of courage, of rebellion, and of the enduring, transformative power of a love that dared to be free. And in the annals of a nation still struggling with the demons of its past, their story, a story of a forbidden union in the heart of the antebellum South, would forever be a testament to the unquenchable human desire for freedom and the revolutionary power of love.